Now, to be clear with this video, I am definitely not in any way, shape, or form saying that I know how to handle a multi-million-dollar franchise. I'm not saying that I know what I'm doing and the people that run Sonic already at Sega don't know what they're doing. Nothing like that. This video is pretty much just for funsies. Just me fantasizing about what I would like to see the Sonic series do in the future. Things that I think would be cool and things that I think might work out well and be well received, possibly. Because what I'm doing here is like Armchair CEO. If I was fully in charge of the Sonic franchise and I had all the power in the world to make whatever I want to happen, what would I do with Sonic? What would I like to see out of this franchise? And though I am approaching it with that kind of mentality of having unlimited resources and full control, I am gonna try to approach this in a relatively realistic way. Not just trying to please myself and make me happy, but do things that I think would make the Sonic community happy and would possibly actually sell well, maybe? I mean, I'm sure many people are gonna disagree with a lot of my ideas here, but generally I think I have fairly reasonable propositions for stuff that would be cool for Sonic. So let's stop beating around the bush and get into it. Let's begin talking about the games. That is the meat of this franchise after all. Now I want to start talking about classic Sonic. This is actually probably the first thing that I'm gonna say that some people are definitely going to disagree with. Because lots of people don't like classic Sonic, they don't want any more of it, they want it to go away. And I am on the opposite side of the planet when it comes to that. Not only do I want more classic Sonic stuff, I want it to no longer be considered like the secondary offshoot Sonic brand. Like, the way things have been ever since Generations is that modern is like core main Sonic stuff, and then classic stuff is, you know, lesser on the side. And I want that to be done away with. I want classic Sonic and modern Sonic standing shoulder to shoulder. I want them to be equals. I want there to be just as much classic material coming out as modern material. And actually part of this proposition is I want the terminology of classic Sonic and modern Sonic to die, because classic Sonic inherently implies that that version of Sonic is old and from the past. But that's not necessarily true. Nothing about classic Sonic needs to rely on nostalgia. It could just be another iteration of Sonic that does different things. So I want that classic term to go away because it creates this idea of being stuck in the past, and one of the things I want to do is to get away from that with classic Sonic. So I propose rebranding classic Sonic to instead Mega Sonic. I feel that's a very appropriate name because, one, it does harken back to his roots in the Mega Drive, but also back in the day, the brand was known as Sega Sonic, so Sega Sonic becomes Mega Sonic, and also it works to harken back to the fact that Sonic used to be the rival to Mario. You got Super Mario and Mega Sonic. I think that works pretty well. Modern Sonic, I don't really know how you rebrand that. You could call it like Dream Sonic, because Dreamcast, if we want to equivalent that to what we're doing with Classic, but that doesn't really work for me. Like, Dream Sonic just doesn't really get across the ideas of modern Sonic too well. You could call it like Adventure Sonic, or give it like Sonic Adventure branding, but I don't necessarily like that either. I don't really know what you call modern Sonic. If anyone's got ideas, throw it in the comments. But as for classic Sonic games, here's the thing. If we're talking about what I would like to see going forward and being realistic with it, I honestly don't think that a new traditional 2D classic Sonic game is in any way a good idea. I feel like Superstars really poisoned the well on that, at least for a while, and we can't revisit just, you know, level-based, go through the zones, get to the end of the level, Sonic game. I don't think that's gonna go over well, even if we did some really different things with it. Because in my head, the thing I really want to see for that kind of Sonic game is let's get out of the limitations of the 90s, of the Mega Drive games, of those original ideas. I want to see a 2D Sonic game that's somewhere in the ballpark of like a Freedom Planet 2, where we evolve the gameplay, we add more mechanics, more systems, we reapproach the existing elements of 2D Sonic and see what can be kept, what can be thrown away, what can be changed and updated. Let's get away from the one-button simplicity. Let's make an actual modern 2D platformer out of classic Sonic. This is why I want to throw away that classic term. There's no reason that the original Sonic can't do new things, and I want to see him do that. But even if we did something like that, I don't necessarily think it would sell, because the unfortunate reality of video games is you can't put amazing gameplay on the back of the box. No one cares about that. You gotta have some kind of exciting new element or something that's gonna draw people in. You need a story that people are gonna really get behind. You need some big new change up to the formula. You can't just say that this is a traditional 2D Sonic game, but now there's all this cool new stuff in it. No one cares. At least not right now, like I said. Maybe down the line we could revisit that idea. But I think right now, with the situation the franchise is in, something that really changes the mold is what 2D Sonic needs. So I propose a Metroidvania. I think that would be something that would excite audiences. And you know, something I was thinking about a lot is making Sonic games dedicated to other Sonic characters. For a while, I have felt that that's not something that's realistically doable. Like, you could make the Chaotix their own little game, but I don't think it would sell. I don't think general audiences that aren't big Sonic fans care about the Chaotix or even really know very much about those characters, and I don't think anyone would buy that game except for Sonic fans. But, of course, there is Shadow. Obviously, he is a character with enough marketing power to sell his own games. And I do think that there's at least one other character like that. I think Knuckles could possibly get his own game to sell, but I think it would have to be something that would really get people excited and get them interested. So I think a new 2D Sonic game that's a Metroidvania, something very different, starring Knuckles, and maybe with a really poppy visual style. Like, if it had fully hand-drawn traditional 2D animation, and that was the entire game, that might be something that you reveal that and people go like, whoa, look at that new 2D Sonic game. That's different. That looks cool. Knuckles getting his own little game, and it looks really interesting. Oh, maybe. And I think the Metroidvania formula would work really well for Sonic. I could see so many ways you could make that work. In my head, a fun idea would be maybe at the start of the game, it's like Sonic 1 style. You don't have the spin dash, you don't have gliding or climbing, you just have the very basics run, jump, roll, and then the first upgrade you get is the spin dash, and now you can get up big slopes you couldn't before, and that opens access to new areas, and then you can climb, and then you can glide. And I'm thinking it's like Sonic Adventure power-ups. You know, those things like barely even did anything in those games, but a Metroidvania, these power-ups you get that give you new abilities, they could open up new areas, that makes a lot more sense for this kind of game. And then you can give Knuckles the shovel claw, and you can dig, and I'm imagining in 2D, the digging is like kind of the yellow wisp, but without the pausing, you can like smoothly like drill claw into the ground and go straight under and start digging around and then launch yourself out of the ground to shoot up into higher platforms and stuff like that. Basically like Pepper Grinder, if you've ever seen that game. But then I'm also thinking of like other potential cool power-ups for Knuckles. You could give him like the breather necklace from SA2, so that way you can breathe underwater. You can get to areas you couldn't before. Maybe give him some swimming power-ups. Like normally you go slow underwater in a Sonic game, but you can get something that can enable you to swim, and then maybe you can do like drill claw swimming under the water. Maybe give Knuckles some upgrades that let him climb not just from walls, but also ceilings. You could unlock the wall spin dash from Sonic Advance 3. That could become an upgrade that you get at some point. And I could also see a combat system making sense for a game like this. You know, it's a spin-off. We can experiment. We can do things that wouldn't necessarily fit in a traditional Sonic game. This is a Knuckles game after all. He's a boxer, so you get some boxing-inspired combat mechanics going on. And then you use those combat moves to also be platforming moves. You know, you unlock an uppercut that can knock enemies up, but also could, like, function like a double jump. Or you can uppercut into a ceiling, and that will transition you into climbing on the ceiling. There's a lot of options for a Metroidvania-type Sonic game, and I just think Knuckles would be a cool pick as a character for something like that. There's a lot of potential in this kind of game, you know, especially nowadays, like 2D action platformer Metroidvanias are really popular. And I feel it's only a matter of time before some Sonic-inspired indie game comes along doing this kind of thing. It would be better if Sonic could capitalize on that first. And then maybe after something like this, we can down the road a couple years later get to a more traditional 2D Sonic game, but with all these updates and enhancements and extra mechanics and features. And then at some point, I would also love to see a 3D classic Sonic game, one that very much maintains all the same design principles of the 2D physics-based Sonic gameplay, but brings it into 3D. I'm talking no homing attack, no boost, no scripting going through loops, like it's all physics-based, it's all done for realsies. No QTE-like design, we have big, sprawling, open-ended platforming stages. That's the kind of thing I want to see, and I want classic Sonic to be the one that has those kinds of 3D Sonic games. Like, modern 3D Sonic games is where we can retain all these terrible design elements like the homing attack and lightspeed dash and running down hallways of platforms floating over bottomless pits. But classic Sonic, I think, being the less popular branch of the franchise, the one that doesn't get as many sales as modern Sonic, ironically, that's the place to experiment and try new things, in my opinion. And heck, once you get like a traditional 3D physics-based Sonic game down, you could start to mess around with that formula. Maybe go for like a collectathon-style 3D Sonic game. Never seen that kind of thing before, except for like Dream Team, but that's not what I mean. I'm talking like big, sandboxy, like physics playground levels with collectibles thrown all over the place, and you gotta figure out how to get your way up to them using the terrain, and you got missions where people ask you to collect all these things in the area before the time runs out, and lots of cool potential opportunities for stuff like that. Like I said, I don't want classic Sonic to be the secondary branch of the franchise anymore. I want it to be an equal with modern Sonic, no longer stuck in the past, no longer stuck to 2D. I just want it to be one of the forms that Sonic takes, and modern Sonic is another form that Sonic takes. And speaking of modern Sonic, what I would like to see out of that is a couple of things. Like, alright, right now, at the time of making this video, we're almost assured that Sonic Team is probably working on the next open zone Sonic game, the sequel to Frontiers. And just from a business perspective, it makes the most sense to let them see that game to the end because of production, they're already working on it, you've already spent money on that game. But what I really think that 3D modern Sonic needs to do is, number one, this is the most important thing, the boost needs to die. It needs to die a horrible, painful death in front of its loved ones, and they're forced to watch. I think the boost has harmed Sonic so much in its gameplay and game design, and I think it needs to go away. We've had more than enough of these games that all play exactly the fucking same since Unleashed. Like, yes, the boost games can be fun, and I do enjoy most of them, but we've been there, we've done that. This gameplay is incredibly shallow, and it's already been pushed far beyond its staying point. I don't think there's any potential left in this gameplay formula or this specific mechanic and how it affects the design of these games. It's time to move on. And really, I think it's time to go back, because it's not like these games couldn't work without the boost. They used to before that, and I think that the adventure-style formula, while something that I still have many issues with, it is something that people really liked, and it is relatively similar to the boost design, but it is a little more freeform and open and does have more room for improvement and evolution. And I don't even think we're that far away from a non-boost 3D Sonic game working again. Like, Shadow Generations isn't that far off from the type of design we saw in, like, Sonic Adventure 2. I could easily envision that game without the boost and just having the spin dash instead, and I think it would work. So what I propose, especially following up Shadow Generations and the success of the third Sonic movie, I think it is time for Sonic Adventure remakes, you know? Like, it's weird that Sega did not hop on the bandwagon of 90s 3D platformer remakes with, like, the Insane trilogy and everything that followed after that. It makes all the sense in the world to revisit the adventure games, and I think now, more than ever, people love Shadow, people like the story-heavy Sonic games that have a little bit more going on, they like the melodrama and the anime shit. And I think in the case of remaking the adventure games, people would find it blasphemous if they were boost games and they didn't play more like the adventure style. So I think that would be a good way to reintroduce a boostless 3D Sonic game. However, Something very important about these adventure remakes that I propose: these would not be like a Crash Insane Trilogy. These would not be faithful one-to-one recreations of the adventure games as they were. I don't think that's a smart idea. The adventure games are way too flawed to be faithfully recreated in the modern day. That is not going to go over well, and I don't think that's smart. No developer today would be comfortable making those games. Not even Sonic Team, I don't think. I think the smart thing to do with the adventure games is to give them the FF7 treatment, completely reimagine them from the ground up, basically make brand new video games with different gameplay, different design, different levels, different everything, but built off the same ideas, the same concepts, and the same stories. But even then, like, make some changes to the story, because those game stories have a lot of problems that could use some improving. Like, the adventure games are the perfect candidates for these kinds of remakes to me, because they're games that have a lot of good elements and a lot of potential, but they have all these problems, and now we can revisit those ideas and reapproach them to hopefully avoid these problems and not make those same mistakes. So while I'm saying we should go back to the adventure-style formula, I'm not saying either of these remakes would play exactly like their original games. I'm thinking they should have, like, new features and mechanics and other things going on, as well as, like, reapproaching existing mechanics that have been around for a while. Like, the homing attack, I hate this mechanic. I think it's friggin' terrible, and I think there's a lot of ways to make it better. So let's try some of those. Let's turn this into more than just repeatedly press the jump button. Let's make it interesting in some way, possibly. Just like what I want to see out of 2D physics-based Sonic games, I want to revisit the adventure formula, but not just do it again. I want to see it improved and evolved and taken to that next step. And then, after doing those adventure remakes, if that works out and people really like it, it sells well, then I think a Sonic Adventure 3 would be a good idea. You know, you build a lot of goodwill with those really solid adventure remakes, hopefully, and then the name Sonic Adventure 3 after doing those remakes would mean a lot. Basically recreate exactly what Crash Bandicoot did with the Insane Trilogy, and then you come out with Crash 4. Considering how much Sonic loves to rip off the success of other franchises these days, I think this would be a pretty smart direction. Plus, adventure remakes allow them to continue to rely on nostalgia and reuse assets from both Sonic and Shadow generations. And as for Open Zone, I think that's something that we can revisit down the road once we have a more solid formula for these types of 3D Sonic games. Once we have something that's actually good, then we start experimenting around with, like, an open world Sonic game. That's what I think would be the smart way to approach things. As for 2D, because yes, I would like to see more 2D modern Sonic games, just like I'd like to see 3D classic games, I want to see 2D modern games. But just like how I want the 3D classic games to be the physics-based ones, and then the modern games rely on the modern design philosophies, I think with 2D, classic is where we get that type of old-school Sonic design. I think for modern 2D, to differentiate itself there, this is where the boost gameplay, I think, would find a nice home. It's no longer the main course of what modern 3D Sonic is doing. It's now for smaller side 2D games. Like, I personally would love to see a return of the Sonic Rush games. You know, make a new Sonic Rush 3, but we're far from the limitations of the DS. We don't do the two-screen thing anymore. Now it's just one nice full-screen HD 2D boost Sonic game, and we get Blaze once again as a starring role and a story built around her and Sonic and the Soul Emeralds and everything. And visually, you know what I think would be really cool for a game like this? What if this game had 2D artwork that looked exactly like Uekawa's old 2D style? Like, that look is totally iconic to Sonic, and it's kind of a crime that we've never had a game that looks like that. That would be amazing, and I think something like a Sonic Rush 3 would be a great opportunity to finally do it. Those are the ideas I have for kind of your mainline Sonic games, both for classic and modern. I think a lot of that makes sense, and I think generally a lot of people would be able to get behind those ideas. What I'm aiming for here is not just things that are going to make me happy. I want to make all types of Sonic fans happy. You know, people like the classic Sonic games and their physics-based stuff, and they want to see more of that. give it to them. People like the big epic Sonic Adventure 3D games and their super story-heavy emphasis on things, give that to them as well. You know, there's been so much debate these days about the Sonic community and how, oh, everyone wants different things, it's impossible to please everyone. And yeah, obviously, it's impossible to please everyone because this franchise has done so many different things. In one product, you could never do all of that. That would be an incoherent mess. So don't do that. Make different Sonic products for different parts of the audience that want different things. I don't see anything wrong with doing that. This is why I don't agree with the whole, like, one Sonic idea that so many people seem to want. So many of the different iterations of Sonic out there are so fundamentally different in what they're trying to do. By mushing them together, you just dilute all of the different unique visions of these different branches of Sonic and make one sloppy mess of Sonic that kind of somewhat resembles all these different versions, but don't really satisfy the fans of any of these iterations of the franchise. Like, one thing, even beyond the whole classic modern thing that you still see, is people wanting the Freedom Fighters to come back and for them to show up in the games. And I don't want that. They don't belong in the games. They're from a different iteration of Sonic, a different vision by different creators. I say, if we want to see the Freedom Fighters again, don't shove them where they don't belong. Give them their own place to shine that does make sense, and I'll come back to that later. But before we move on from the games, I also want to talk about spin-offs a little bit, because I do have some ideas there. Looking at the history of spin-offs in the Sonic franchise, it hasn't gone very well. You know, there was a time where they really wanted Sonic to be like an equivalent to Mario, because Mario's got the sports games and the party games and the kart racing games. Mario is just Nintendo's, like, standard franchise that they plaster on to whatever other kinds of games they want to do. And Sega clearly wanted that with Sonic for a while. Here's Sega Tennis with Sonic front and center. Here's Sonic Shuffle and all these other things. But the reality today is that Sonic is just no Mario, and it doesn't have the brand power to have 45 different Sonic spin-offs coming out all the time. So I think the realistic future for Sonic is to have fewer, smarter spin-offs that make sense for this franchise and would work out decently well. And if you look at the history of Sonic spin-offs, clearly the most successful genre has been racing games. There have been many different racing sub-series with many different entries in them, and that makes a lot of sense considering what Sonic is all about. No shit, racing is a good thing to do. So I think racing spin-offs is always a safe bet, though at the time of this, they just announced that new Sonic Racing Crossworlds or whatever it is, and they're doing the kart racing thing again. And personally, this is where we're getting a little bit less into, like, smart things to actually do for Sonic as a brand, and more just, like, stuff I want. Considering the potential and history Sonic has had in racing games, I think just doing generic Mario ripoff kart racers is a waste of time. I think there is so much potential in the idea of Sonic R, a foot racing Sonic game that takes advantage of what these characters can do. I would love to see a classic revisit of Sonic R, but it's not a terrible Saturn game with no content. You make a real, dedicated 3D foot racing classic Sonic game. I think that could be really awesome if done well. And I just want to see a new Sonic Riders game, because Riders, as dumb as it is awesome, and the gameplay is really cool and in-depth, and I would love to see a return to that series. I don't think it would sell particularly well. I think the wider gaming world would go, what? Why are they making a new Sonic Riders? Wasn't that one of those bad, stupid 2000s games? And yes, it was, but it was cool. And I'm imagining a new modern Sonic Riders where it has cell shading that has the kind of like hatching style that we saw in the 2D artwork. You get that in 3D in real time, and it would make it so stylish and unique. That's actually another thing I'm trying to push with all these game ideas, is giving Sonic more visual flair to it, having different art styles for different games that pop a little more. You know, the 2D classic games, you make them look like hand-drawn animation, like the CD intro or something like that. 2D modern game, you make it look like the Uekawa art. You get this Riders game, and it looks like the intro of Riders, but in 3D. You got 3D classic games, 3D modern games, and they have slightly different art styles. You know, get some more visual variety, more visual flair to this franchise. I think that's something that it's desperately needed for a while. And I think something that makes a lot of sense for Sonic for another type of spin-off that it's only dipped its toes in, and I would say that barely even counts, an RPG. You know, considering how much the fans love Sonic story stuff, the characters, the world, how much they love the big epic anime stories where we go to space and fight a god, like, that's JRPG bread and butter, and I think it's high time we got a proper, real crack at a Sonic JRPG. Like, I'm thinking very traditional style with, like, turn-based combat, and an RPG allows for so much more room and opportunity for world building and storytelling, because those games have so much story just right built into them. So many Sonic fans would go nuts for something like that, I think. And that's pretty much everything I have in terms of ideas for new Sonic games. Like, all that is years of ideas right there. And then based on how everything does, we can go from there and see what we should do more of, what we should do less of, and you figure it out from there. But I think that's a solid plan as a course of action going forward for now. But then we also have all the external media, the Sonic shows and the comics and the movies and all that stuff that we need to handle as well. But before we talk about that, I want to talk about the Sonic brand itself, and especially, like, storytelling and how we're going to handle things going forward. Because Sonic has been a giant friggin' mess for a very, very long time, and something that I desperately want to see is that mess cleaned up. But that is really impossible to do if we want to continue off of what we've had so far, because it's been so screwed up for so long. There is no putting the pieces together here. The only way that you can truly fix things is with a reboot, and I suggest that is what we do. However, I do not think that we start over from the beginning. I don't think anybody wants that or cares that much. I think the smart approach is to reboot the main Sonic series, but we continue from the equivalent point we're at right now. We change the past, we retcon things, we clean things up, and we'll fill the audience in along the way as we go in this new version of the Sonic franchise. Might seem a little bit weird to do this, but plenty of series have done it successfully before. Look at the Batman Arkham games. Those take place in their own new version of the Batman universe, yet they don't start at the beginning of Batman. It assumes that you have a general idea of what this series and what these characters are like, and it just goes. We can do that same thing with Sonic, and I think it would be fine. What this would allow us to do is set the record straight once and for all and clean up all the inconsistencies and continuity errors that have piled up over the decades with this series. Instead of people asking questions of, well, how is this the case when in the previous game this character did that thing in this situation, so that doesn't really match with what's happening right now? Currently, the solution to that problem is we're given non-answers that aren't really true to skirt around the fact that they just don't care, they've just changed it and you're gonna have to deal with it. As opposed to if we just make a hard reboot, then you say, yeah, that's how it was before, but that's not how things are anymore. Those events didn't occur exactly like that in this new version of the franchise. Which is kind of like what they've been doing anyway lately, but they are trying to still make it that, like, no, this is the same continuity as the old games. Even though there's a bunch of stuff from those old games that's no longer allowed, and we're gonna ignore and retcon and change those things and pretend they don't exist anymore. And then you're like, but wait, but they did exist, and now they don't, and now things are different, and it doesn't match up with what's happening. All that goes away if you just be honest with the audience and say, we've rebooted, things that used to exist no longer exist, things are different now. And one of the things I would want to do with this that a lot of people would not like and would not agree with, but I don't care, I am making a hard separation between Classic Sonic and Modern Sonic. Classic Sonic is no longer a younger version of Sonic, or Sonic from the past, or even Sonic from a different dimension. It's just a different branch of the franchise that is just doing its own thing. And Modern Sonic is its own distinct branch of the franchise, doing its own thing. And the two are unrelated and do not interact with each other. And I know many people hate this idea. Anytime I propose this kind of thing, I always see people saying, why do we need multiple Sonics? But to that, my question is, why do we need just one Sonic? What is the benefit of having just one Sonic? Especially considering we've never really had just one Sonic. Even back in the 90s, Sonic was different in Japan and internationally. There have always been multiple different Sonics. And like the adventure games, especially SA2, there was a deliberate attempt to shift Sonic into a different direction and basically make a different iteration of Sonic. And then that happened again in the 2010s. Like, there have always been different Sonics, it's just that they've all been messily thrown together and we've been lied to and told they're all one Sonic. Just like with the whole reboot thing, I say we just be honest and upfront about it now. The reason I want classic Sonic to persist as its own separate entity from modern Sonic is twofold. One, I prefer classic Sonic, I think it's better than modern Sonic, and so I don't want it to go away, obviously. But two, the reason I think that is because, in my opinion, modern Sonic, starting with Adventure, made a lot of mistakes and went down the wrong path. I think the Sonic franchise has gone in the wrong direction, and I think it is unrecoverable at this point. As long as we hold on to all the baggage and all the mistakes that have been made for the past 25 years, Sonic will never get back on track in my eyes. The only way to right the wrongs is to completely delete them. To get what is, in my head, the best possible iteration of Sonic, it would require throwing away so much of what Sonic has become and what people like about it. Like, I love Shadow and Blaze, but I would say those characters need to go if I can only have one iteration of Sonic. And I don't want that. I don't want those characters to go away. I still want a modern version of Sonic to exist because, while not my preference and while I don't think it's as good, there's still a lot that I do like about modern Sonic, and I see no problem with allowing the different visions of Sonic that have existed over time to exist in parallel with each other, rather than, again, trying to mush them into one slush of different ideas that don't mesh well together. If the people that want just one Sonic got what they wanted, and we treated Classic like just an art style change, and that would mean going forward, like, Sage would be showing up in classic Sonic games. And if you're gonna do that to me, then quite frankly, you can go fuck off. I absolutely do not want to see that character touch classic Sonic. And there are so many things like that. Like, call me a classic fanboy all you want, but I do not want so many of the stupid ideas of modern Sonic tainting the pure original vision of classic Sonic. I want the classic branch of the franchise to be a glimpse at what could have been if this series never made all the mistakes it did. It's an opportunity to go back and do things right and see the good future of what this franchise could be, at least in my eyes. But again, this isn't just about what I want, which is why I do want to keep modern Sonic around so we can have all those things. And like I said, I like modern Sonic. I don't want those things to go away. So to me, making separate, distinct versions of the series that can do different things from each other is the best possible outcome. In fact, I would advocate for more iterations of Sonic beyond just classic and modern. Like I said before about SatAM, I say if we're gonna bring back the Freedom Fighters, let's do it in a way that makes sense. I propose a reboot of SatAM, a brand new series that's in its own continuity, its own version of Sonic that takes all the ideas of the original SatAM, which I think had a lot of promise and a lot of potential, but weren't able to be properly executed because it was a very rushed, low-budget show. Now we can revisit those ideas and do them justice in a way they couldn't originally. And then that vision of Sonic gets to live on as its own distinct entity, and fans of that version of Sonic get to have it. If you love 90s American Sonic eating chili dogs and cracking wise all the time, here's a place where you can get that. If you want something more authentic to the original vision of Sonic, go to the classic stuff. If you want the big epic anime stories, go to the modern stuff, you know? And along with that, like, I don't care whatsoever about the Paramount live-action Sonic movies, but I'm not gonna sit here and say we get rid of them because they're successful, they're popular, people like them. Keep that going until that series inevitably crashes and burns. Same with the IDW comics. I hate those frickin' comics, but I say we keep them going. However, what I would do is I would officially separate those from canon, so that way they are no longer beholden to maintaining the status quo of the games. I say we remove the shackles from the IDW comics and tell the people making those they can do whatever they want because their work is now its own Sonic that can be anything they want it to be. I think that would be the best thing to do for that comic series and for fans of that comic series, no? By doing all this, we put an end to the nightmare that is Sonic fans constantly talking about the stupid freaking canon, and people can focus on whether or not they actually enjoy the stories that are being told in these things. And this approach opens the door for new iterations of Sonic to appear. Look at any other long-running franchise, and they have so many iterations, and it works great. Like, look at Ninja Turtles. You have the recent movie, which was its own version. You have the IDW comic series, also its own thing. You have The Last Ronin, another IDW comic that is also its own thing. And in the video game space, you have games coming out based on the recent animated movie. They're doing a Last Ronin game. They have a game based on the older TMNT cartoon. They have one based on the 80s cartoon. They have one that's an entirely original version of TMNT. And it's fine. No one complains. No one has a problem with it. In fact, it's pretty cool. Especially in today's world of this obsession with stupid frickin' multiverses. I think this idea of boiling everything down to just this one iteration of Sonic makes the least sense in the world. Like I already said, there are so many different types of Sonic fans out there that like so many different aspects of this franchise. Pleasing them all with one product is impossible, so don't even try. Do the smarter thing. The only thing I think we have to do here is be very clear about things, that these are all separate, different iterations of the franchise, so people don't think that, like, the SatAM reboot and the classic stuff are the same continuity, because they're not. They're two separate things that are doing their own thing, that have their own vision, and we allow that to be. The only things that I would particularly like to see added into this milieu of Sonic material is, one, I would love to see a classic Sonic manga that is very true to the games and would be canon. Like I said, I'm imagining a reboot for Sonic where we start fresh, and now classic Sonic is completely separate from modern, and while the games we just keep going, we don't revisit Sonic 1, 2, 3K, this manga would be a place to do that. What I would like out of a classic Sonic manga is one-off episodic adventures where Sonic is on the tornado and he flies from island to island and gets in these little story arcs where he runs into whoever lives on these islands and whatever's going on in their lives, and some trouble shows up, Eggman's doing something bad, or maybe even other bad guys, why not? And Sonic gets involved, he helps out, he saves the day, and by the end of the adventure, Sonic makes the lives of the people there a little bit better, and then he flies off to his next adventure. And this manga would not be like, first issue, adapt Sonic 1, second issue, adapt Sonic 2, no. The game stories would be sprinkled around this manga basically randomly, because so many Sonic games have an arbitrary amount of time between them, and this manga would be a chance to see all those adventures that we never see between the games. We don't treat the game stories as special stories. We don't treat the game characters as special characters. They are just some of the adventures that Sonic has been on, and some of the people he's run into along the way. We don't make Sonic, Tails, Knuckles, and Amy the main characters of this manga. The only main character is Sonic, and Tails will be there a good amount of the time, but sometimes there'll be chapters where he's just not there, because on this random particular adventure, Sonic decided to fly solo. And Amy might show up every now and then because she's chasing after Sonic, but not always. And there'll be other characters newly introduced to this manga that might show up 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. But this series would really be focusing on the nomadic adventures of Sonic and him traveling the world and the things he encounters along the way. This is the kind of thing I'm talking about. Like, that is a lot closer to what I think the original idea behind Sonic was. Like, Knuckles was originally intended to be a one-off character. It was just supposed to be an adventure where Sonic comes to this magical floating island and there's a guardian of some Master Emerald there, and he helps him out, and then Sonic says goodbye, Knuckles, and he moves on to his next adventure, and that's it. And that was Knuckles' little one-off story in this endless series of little one-off stories. It's because of everything that came after that Knuckles became a Sonic character, and now he shows up all the time, even though it doesn't make sense for him because he's supposed to be guarding the Master Emerald, and that's where these problems come from. This fixes that. In classic Sonic, Knuckles is a one-off character that appeared for the events of Sonic 3, and then he's gone. Maybe we have some one-offs focusing on Knuckles where Sonic isn't there, but he is not a Sonic character. In modern Sonic, we do that. In that series, he shows up all the time. He's one of Sonic's friends. I really suggest we just get rid of the Guardian of the Master Emerald thing from Knuckles. Have it be that at the events of SA2, he sacrifices the Master Emerald. That was what he was guarding it for. That was his duty. Make it some prophecy that he needed to protect the Master Emerald so it could be used for the events of SA2 to stop the arc or whatever. And then, from that point on, you could tell new stories with Knuckles about him no longer having his duty and having to find his place in the world now that he doesn't have something he needs to do. And then we can explore different things with modern Knuckles and classic Knuckles. They can divert and become different characters. Those are the benefits that come from this sort of approach to Sonic. Anyway, that's what I'd like to see out of a classic Sonic manga. Random one-off adventures that we follow Sonic on, and the games are sprinkled throughout that, and that's how you could see this new canon version of what those game stories are. Meanwhile, for modern Sonic, I'd like a similar thing to re-explore those old stories in a new canon format, but not through games, except for the adventure games. I think this would start with the adventure remakes, and they would have some changes to them to fit this new version. And then going on from there, like I said, we do SA3 and then any number of new games beyond that. But then to revisit the events of, like, Sonic Battle, or the Rush games, or the Riders games, or whatever, I think a series of anime movies would be a really good approach. Like, do we honestly need a remake of Shadow the Hedgehog? I really don't think so. But an anime movie adapting Shadow the Hedgehog with changes that can make it fit this new version of the canon and also clean up the story and make it a lot more understandable and digestible? That is something I think that we could do, maybe. We get to revisit a lot of these troubled Sonic stories that people still have fondness for, and again, we get to rely on that nostalgia, but also we're cleaning them up. We improve them, we make them better, we make them more coherent. You know, if we do something where we revisit colors, we fix the story and the character writing, you know? So going forward, we have context of what this world is like and what this new history is. But at the same time, for all the normies that are not crazy hardcore Sonic weirdos, they don't even need to pay attention to any of that, and they'll be fine. And then for new fans coming into the series, they don't have to play 50 games or watch 300 hours of people discussing the games in depth to get up to speed. They can just watch these handful of Sonic anime movies, and now they know what's going on. And then once we're done adapting all of the major game stories that are relevant and important, maybe we start getting some original Sonic anime stories, or maybe an anime series, or whatever. You see, are my ideas really that crazy? Doesn't that sound cool? Doesn't that sound like something you want? I think it's overall fairly reasonable, and I think a lot of people would be happy with it, and I think there is a decent chance that this stuff might be well received and might even do well, possibly. Again, I don't know anything about managing a multi-million-dollar franchise, and of course these are all just ideas. When it comes to actually making any of these projects, there's a whole lot of complications that'd probably get in the way and make them not turn out as well as they would be in my mind. But you know, this is an ideal scenario in my head. All these ideas are, in my opinion, the best thing Sonic could do going forward. But like I said, I don't necessarily know what I'm talking about, and I could be very wrong about any of this, and I'm sure there are many fans who are going to disagree with my ideas, and they have their own ideas of what they think would be cool. Whatever, man, I'm just having fun here.